Welcome everyone to Zoom into Books this evening. We are having our Spring Fling author celebration. And tonight we have a very special Zoom into Books with the contributors to Many Genres, One Craft. We are celebrating the 10th year anniversary of the publication of this book. So I'm going to turn it over to Heidi Ruby Miller, who is one of the editors of the book, and she's going to give you background and introduce the contributors. Take it away, Heidi.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for hosting us tonight. And welcome everyone into Zoom Into Books. And we're going to be talking about this wonderful creation, Many Genres, One Craft. And I'm betting that most of the people in the audience actually already have this book because I see a lot of Seton Hill names out there. So thanks for coming, as though you don't get enough of us every day on Zoom anyway, but I'm so glad that you're here. And I want to introduce all of the other contributors that we have tonight that are going to be speaking with you. First of all, my co-editor, Michael A. Harnson. And Mike, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Harnson. I was privileged to co-edit Many Genres, One Craft with Heidi Ruby Miller and work with a number of the people that are guests tonight on this panel along with me. I teach full-time still at Seton Hill University. I've been doing it since 1999. Shortly after an MFA program in writing popular fiction was launched, and I'm not going to say too much about that program because it was originated by two of the people that are with us tonight, my colleagues at Seton Hill. But this was one of, if not the first and only programs available in America where you could get a master's degree in writing commercially oriented, novel-length, popular genre fiction. And 10 years ago, Heidi and I talked about putting this book together, not only because we knew a lot of people who were geniuses in working in writing popular fiction, but also because in our educational travels, we never found a good book for teaching this stuff, even in our MFA program. So we decided we'd make our own. And that's what we're talking about tonight. So anyway, that was a little long-winded, but nice to see you all. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And we also have Timmons Isaias. Tim, or Timmons, since we have another Tim. You'll be Timmons tonight.
Hello. I'm mostly a short fiction and poetry writer. As of this week, my stuff's been in 22 languages. And I write both popular fiction, which is what our book is about, and I write on the literary side too, where people are jealous of the fact that I get paid when I write on the other side. So that's about it.
Okay, and then we have the other Tim Wagner. Tim Wagner, tell us about yourself.
Well, I teach full-time at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio. I started there in 1999 too, so Mike and I have like 21 years in, something like that. Not that we're counting to retirement, because we're not. I write horror and fantasy and media tie-ins, published around 50 novels and 7 collections of short stories. And I had the distinction of being one of my article was one of the things Heidi used in the proposal for Many Genres, One Craft. And then I completely forgot about that. And then she contacted me and I was in a panic thinking I had to write an essay like in 3 days or something. She's like, no, that was in the proposal. And I felt like a great big idiot. So that's me.
Well, thank you, Tim. And we have Jason Jack Miller, who might be related to me.
Maybe, and if I wouldn't have been able to unmute my video, that would have been kind of awkward. So, yep, I'm Jason Jack Miller. You know, written some travel and some fiction, and I teach high school Earth and Space Science, and I'm just doing my best to bridge the gap between adolescence and retirement. So.
And we have one of the co-founders of the WPF program, Lee Tobin McLean.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming. I did help to found this program along with Dr. Albert Wendland, and I really wanted to teach and talk about popular fiction, and it's like a miracle that I get to actually do that every day and meet with so many writers writing the kind of stuff that I really like to read. So I also write romance, and I write the little short kind of romance, category romance, and I also write longer romance, but it's all kind of on the sweet side, and I am super happy that I get to do that and to work with these wonderful students.
Awesome, thank you, Lee. And one of the other co-founders, Albert Wendland. Al, you're still muted.
Wait a minute.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, Lee McLean came up with the idea for the Writing Popular Fiction program. And when she first told it to me, I knew immediately it was going to be successful. That might just be self-fulfilling, but still, it was great. Seton Hill was very supportive of it. It focuses, yes, on popular fiction. And I was thrilled whenever this book came out of it, because everybody in the book was involved in some way with Writing Popular Fiction, our program. So yeah, this becomes a kind of culmination or emblem, whatever you want to call it, of it. I'm a science fiction writer. Yes, I've been in the program since the beginning. I'm semi-retired, but not retired in terms of the MFA in Writing Popular Fiction. Science fiction and poetry, and I love the program, and the book, yeah, was very special in connection with it.
Awesome, thank you, Al. And I, of course, write science fiction as well. Al and I are the science fiction people at Seton Hill. And I also wrote a tie-in novel for Philip Pisley Farmers Universe. So Tim and I are in some of the same organizations as well. And what I wanted to kind of shape this as tonight, I think the first half hour or so, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the articles that each of these contributors had in the Many Genres book. And then, of course, you can have questions in at any time in the chat, and I will try to get to them, or Ashley will try to get them to me. And in the meantime, I was going to start with Mike Arnson's article, Tuning Up Your Writing. And if you're following along at home, it's on page 32 in your Many Genres one craft textbook. And Mike is looking at his now to refresh himself. I've already reread everyone's articles for tonight, so that's how I got my notes. But one of the things that I think is great about the articles is I wanted for each of the contributors also to talk about how they are using some of these same techniques within their own writing. But Mike, we'll start with you. And I liked how your little headings were musing, ooh baby baby, sing along, wax poetic, and end notes. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about how you came, first of all, to want to do a metaphor using music in writing together.
Okay, thanks. To me, a lot of the fun of writing is kind of akin to writing music, really. You know, I write a lot of poetry as well as fiction, which I didn't come to until I was a college student. I wrote fiction before that. But in college, poetry was a real wake up for me. And the longer I sat with it, the more I realized that's part of what we respond to when we're reading a good story, is the way things sound. And I work predominantly in the horror genre, like Tim Wagner, and you know, he'll vouch, I think, for what I'm saying when I say that reading H.P. Lovecraft is like listening to a heavy metal album or something, because the sounds of the language create the mood. they put you in a mood, and a lot of it's unconscious. And so I bring this into my teaching quite often in creative writing classes, not just in the MFA program, but in other classes at Seton Hill and even elsewhere, because it's so easy to forget this kind of notion that words really are founded in sounds. And it's right there in the root of the word, and we just take it for granted. And so if you want to improve your writing, I think the first thing you can do is to not take it for granted and to think very carefully about how to manipulate your prose in a way similar to a musical conductor or somebody who's writing a song, who's thinking about the moods they're creating and how they might match or stand in juxtaposition with the ideas and concepts. So that essay, Tuning Up Your Writing, is really all about that. And I was glad I had a chance to write it for this book because it gave me a chance to really organize my thinking about it and bring in some of the lessons that I've been teaching about it in the classroom into a written form.
Awesome. And I know, Jason, you also always use the whole music as metaphor. Did you want to talk a little bit about how you have almost literally put that into some of your work?
I know that anytime you go after Mike Arnson, you have to be thinking on your toes because inevitably he steals what, but I think my article was in the book was about descriptive language. And it's interesting to hear Mike talk so much about language because that's what I was going to say. For me, it was being really from a nonfiction background. And I was a whitewater raft guide, but I was taking my undergrad science classes at the time. And I think that I fell in love with the vocabulary of science and realizing that science and these little esoteric pockets of anything had their own language and vernacular built in. So I thought, wow, there's this beautiful language to appropriate. Ed Abbey, ironically, is I think who I got that from. Ed Abbey, who was from Indiana, Pennsylvania, wrote Desert Solitaire about his year at Arches National Park as a ranger. He also wrote The Monkey Wrench Gang about a plot to blow up Glen Canyon Dam. But again, just to kind of conclude with going back to what Mike said, he used Native American words and the Latin scientific names of the plants that he stumbled upon. And the way that those things were interspersed, it was music. It was music. It was, the Kyparowitz Plateau with the Navajo sandstone and the monkey paw and maidenhair ferns growing down from the waterfalls. So I wanted to bring that to my fiction. And that's, I think, probably why I ended up writing what I did. So I was glad to have a nice segue to be able to talk about that. So that was kind of lucky there. Thank you.
I'm pretty good at segues. And that was from Jason's article, Painting Your Setting with Concrete Nouns, which is on page 115. And speaking of setting, we go segue to Al Wendland because Al talks about description on the edge, which is the sublime in science fiction. And if you're writing about something that you maybe have not experienced yourself, tell us about that, Al.
Yeah, this is this is part of a bigger topic. The article was an attempt to do something big and specific for a genre at the same time. The big topic is description, and I talk a lot about this is a result of reading an awful lot of descriptions in popular fiction, breaking it down into scientific details, sensory details, emotional details, and poetic details. Now, the emotional part is the one that most often gets neglected in terms of discussion, but it's also what's used the most. Now, in science fiction, it's really interesting because so often you will get a topic, setting, an object that's a conceptual thing that nobody has ever really seen, that might be purely imaginary. So describing it accurately is not a possibility. That's not a form of evaluation or use. It's a means of trying to encourage define emotional responses to it, and then use those emotional responses as defined by the writer as a means of creating the object in the first place. suggesting it for the reader and getting more of a reader connection. Now, I was dealing specifically with the Sublime. 4 characteristics to the Sublime, which you should need. And you get this often in science fiction where you encounter an object that's so large, so new, so powerful that it becomes incomprehensible. You can't understand it. This is all the first reaction to it. And this is what's defined in terms of the description of trying to depict it through the reactions of the people. Incomprehensible. It's indescribable. You can't come up with a means to describe it at first. It's overwhelming. You feel like you're totally awestruck and, it's just beyond your comprehension and understanding and perception. And ultimately, that makes it frightening because it's beyond your control, okay? And what the article talks about is how to use those devices, those reactions, as a means of creating an object that you can't really create because it doesn't exist, it's purely imaginary, but creating it through the responses that you're describing more than you are of the object itself. And thus the responses are what's creating the object in the first place. And that's great because it gives a real tie between the subject matter and the readers themselves. That's why the emotional details are so successful in description. And I use a couple examples, and that's how it worked in the article itself.
Awesome. And I would say, Al, from my perspective, that I think people who like science fiction like the Sublime and find hope in the Sublime. That's how I always feel. And I think people that don't care for science fiction, it is because they're afraid of the Sublime. They're afraid of what they don't understand. They're afraid of the largesse of what is out there. And actually, when you're talking about emotion, that's going to bring me to Lee. I'm not going to talk about your article yet, Lee, because you did this great time management article, which we're going to talk about at the end. But because you are a romance writer, would you please speak to emotion in writing and just how you need to get that in there as a romance writer, please?
Emotion, I think emotion is important and crucial in every genre, but romance lives and dies by emotion. And it's all about, finding a way to describe that indescribable feeling of falling in love and wondering how it will go and feeling hopeless and then hopeful. And there's so much to describe, and you have to find a way to do it that's sort of schmaltzy, but not overly schmaltzy. And it's such a balancing act. And I think that's probably in every genre, but romance, you tend to sometimes tip over one edge or the other. So it's a challenge, always a challenge.
And I would say another challenge, and Timmons and Zayas can handle this one, is knowing what words to avoid and which ones to make sure that you're putting in there in order to have that clarity in your writing, for the reader to be able to grasp these concepts and to get to that emotional point. And his article, of course, is the "Don't be a bobblehead." And anyone who's ever had him in class knows exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, my article is all about what to get out of there so that you can get to the good stuff the other folks have been talking about. And it came from years of critiquing and editing and then a few years teaching at that point. And I just had the habit, if I realized I was typing something for the third time as an explanation to a student, I just copied it and pasted it into a master document so I'd never have to type it again. And actually had Will Horner, who was one of our students and is a publisher, and he had asked me where these were coming from. And I told him about the document, and he asked if he could just see the whole thing, and I sent it. And he sent me a contract and a check and said, turn this into an essay. And so that's what happened with that. But and now, all these years later, I teach that method. If you're going to learn how to teach, one of the things to do is to write down the stuff that annoys you, because that'll be a talk someday. And it also defines your voice, because this is the stuff you're not doing. Anyway.
Exactly. And I was actually wanted to hear from the horror writers with emotion, because I know that you have to live and die, most literally, by some of the emotion that goes into horror too. So Mike or Tim, one of you want to take that?
I saw Mike gesture at me, so I'll go ahead and take that. One of the things I tell people all the time about horror writing is that, you know, like any kind of fiction, everything, well, Al was talking about this too, it's filtered through a character's perceptions. And so it doesn't really matter what they're, you know, perceiving. It has to be something that causes that kind of fear reaction in them. You know, I'll tell students that imagine a monster is walking around in a field and nobody's there to perceive it. You know, it's kind of the horror version of the tree falling in the woods kind of thing, and nobody's around. Is it even a monster at that point? It's just minding its own business. It's not a monster until somebody's there to perceive it and react to it. And I also talk about the difference between the first two Alien movies, because in Alien, they're just regular, you know, workaday schlubs that are doing their thing, and then this monster gets on their ship. But in the second one, it's a bunch of space Marines that have been trained to deal with, you know, extraterrestrial threats. Maybe not as bad as the aliens, but they don't know that yet. But they're trained, so they're not scared. So Alien is a horror movie, but Aliens is an action-adventure movie. Because really, and even Ripley by this point has had enough experience dealing with an alien that she's not scared. So yeah, I think it's hugely important in horror to write with a very close and immersive point of view, because otherwise, you know, our genre's got a emotion for a name. You have to be able to evoke it.
Heidi's muted, so I'm going to keep talking.
Go for it.
I'm just kidding. First off, you guys need to get Tim Wagner's book, Writing in the Dark, if you're interested in horror writing. There you go. It just came out, and it's already, in my mind, a classic in horror instruction. But I had one quick comment, Tim, and that was that, what is Alien 3 then? I would say it's probably a Mother's Day movie. You know, there's an old cliche about all writing, really, that comes out of writers' workshops, and it's write what you know, right? Write what you know. And if you're going to write fiction that is keyed in, or let's say genre fiction that is where the emotions are central, all the way from horror to romance, you really have to, I think, be in tune with your own kind of emotional processing of the world. You should journal about your feelings. You should explore your feelings in a touchy-feely way, maybe privately, and just, you know, get comfortable sharing. In fiction, you can use third person and try to make it as objectified as possible, but to get comfortable sharing things and talking about things that perhaps are discomforting, which is what all horror writers are masters of.
Very true. And actually that for both of you, but especially Tim Wagner, the pacing also, because your article was all about pacing, and one of them you talked about was atmospheric pace and suspenseful pace. So how does that play into maybe when you were talking about like the Alien movies, for instance? I know there's also a very different way that they, if you want to keep going with the Alien theme, you can use your own theme if you want.
Alien's good. Alien works for just about everything. Worked for Mother's Day for Mike a minute ago, so, you know, it works great. You know, the atmospheric pace, because when I came up with the article, I was thinking about a lot of student manuscripts I'd seen that a lot of times they feel like you're reading somebody beating a bass drum at the same pace, you know, the same exact rhythm all the time. And it's hard to try to get people to feel the kind of rhythm the way that you would like from an orchestral piece. Everybody knows what that's like, for it to be louder sometimes, softer sometimes, faster sometimes, more instruments, less instruments, whatever. Some people seem to have a feel for that, but a lot of people don't. So I thought if I could go ahead and like sort of label this at least 4 basic paces and maybe give people some tools that might help. So atmospheric pace is just when you're trying to create a mood for a scene, whatever it might be. Whether you do the stereotype of it raining at a funeral, or you work against it and have it be sunny at a funeral, or people happy at the funeral for some reason. Maybe they love this person, they're celebrating, the person's life, or maybe they're just jerks and they're happy the person's gone, who knows. But that's hugely important in horror. I remember reading or listening on audio to Gillian Flynn's Dark Places, I think it was. And every single damn word in that book is dripping with atmosphere. The thing is just horror from sentence to sentence to sentence. It's amazing. And the people that are capable of creating that, I think, can create some pretty powerful horror. In terms of suspenseful pace, suspense is, it's a very counterintuitive way to write. You actually clog up your narrative with a lot of extra detail that's ominous, because people then are like, oh my God, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And then they actually read it faster because they want to get through to the point where they find out what happens. And so it's a very strange kind of, backward technique that it works great. I remember sitting in the movie theater watching the first Paranormal Activity movie with a whole bunch of, I guess millennials are at that point, whatever. And everybody was sitting, the young people were sitting there on the edge of their seats. And I'm like, it's been an hour, would something please happen? Anything. And then a pot falls from the ceiling and I'm in the kitchen. I'm like, it's it? But it absolutely terrified them. And I realized it was because their entire world is under their control. They're constantly controlling all their technology and everything. They're not used to having somebody else in complete control. And for them, it was mesmerizing. And so that kind of suspense, when somebody else is in control and you're trying to kind of get it back, but you can't because you're stuck with the movie, the way it's unspooling in front of you. You're stuck with the words, one after the other until you get where you want to go. It's a really powerful technique. I mean, all words, images or whatever in a movie, you control people, but with suspense, I think you can become a master manipulator like Hitchcock was.
Awesome. And speaking of atmosphere, I know, Jason, in your article that was about painting your setting with concrete nouns, you gave an example about atmosphere as it in regards to places and specifically to local events and so forth. And I thought one of the best illustrations you talked about was the St. Patrick's Day parade. Would you want to share that with us, please?
Yeah, she's referring to the fact that during the blizzard of '93, Boston canceled their St. Patrick's Day parade and Pittsburgh did not, as an example of the type of detail that would, and I always find those things through research. And I really, really love research for that fact. I think that, it's almost like creative research where I'm not willing to let it, I don't know. It's weird how things pop out, but we're working on that book set in Eastern Europe. And I had it on my map. And of course, I'm looking at things on the map and there was the Red Tower of Death. And I was like, oh my, and it was a place where, or it was a work camp. So, again, I talked about this, I feel like the other day somewhere else, but I think that, research provides the level of detail that, I always give the example, Alan First, he writes, I feel so weird sitting next to I'm not endorsing him, but it's set between World War I and World War II, was talking about his research, and he was giving a speech at Oxford, and he was talking about the beginning of World War II and talked about how there was a plot to kind of, end the war early by blowing up the oil plants in Romania, but BP actually said no. And he said when he delivered this bit of information to the audience, he could hear people gasping, and I think those are the kind of details that sometimes, somebody mentioned write what you know. And I think that's a way, it's like, well, I've researched this, so now I know it. And therefore I can write it, right? So it's one of those things where even, people that are like, well, I don't know how to describe a fantasy setting. It's like, look at anthropology, look at, the cultures that have existed on this planet. So many of which, I had a student this term, and I'll kind of end with this, but she was writing a fantasy, and it was kind of, fun thinking about, well, what could I do as an example to expand, you know, the food things. And I stumbled upon, it was a Norwegian recipe, I think, and was made out of milk just after the calf was born because of the amount of richness in there. And I was like, well, that's like a whole other thing I never thought about. But if you're in a agrarian community, a pastoral community, those are the kind of things that would be, you know, I guess if the Inuit really do have 25 different words for snow, then I should use at least 3 or 4 instead of the same one over and over again. So
I actually read up a good point about fantasy and science fiction, and I'm going to ask Al first, and then I'll ask Timmons later. Al, how do you, at least in your own writing, or maybe examples from other writing, infuse ideas that the reader may be unfamiliar with in a science fictional setting, especially if it could be on a different planet or in the far future? How do you infuse that in so the reader can engage with it?
Well, 2 things going on. First, I feel there are 2 kinds of research. There's the kind of research that you're writing a novel and you come up to a problem and you think, oh, I've got to find out more information about this. So that's very focused homework kind of research. But then there's the other kind, which I think Jason was talking about, where you just read and you read what interests you and you become fascinated by different topics that you never expected to become fascinated in. And especially now, because there's, in terms of science fiction, there's so much popularization of different science topics going on. Just random reading in that will give you a topic, an idea, and just suddenly you want to run with it. You know, there are little things, the novel I'm working on right now, I just started reading about the various types of exoplanets that are being discovered now. And it's not as if those are even pinned down because they don't know all the data. So from little bits of data, they're speculating about those worlds. So in some ways, they're creating worlds at the same time that they're trying to find out about them. And you can use that. You can just be shopping through a whole bunch of them and suddenly come across something that generates an idea, or, oh, wouldn't it be cool to throw this into the book? And I definitely have an example of that, you know, in the book I'm working on right now, just suddenly something popped up and I thought, yeah, get that in there. But the interesting thing, and here too, I'm sure this is true in every genre, but I think especially in science fiction, it just might be a little bit more fun. I was reading a book about the Outlaw Ocean, I think it was called, or the Outlaw Sea, I can't remember the title. And it dealt with the fact that on the high seas, there is very little written law because you're always outside of the boundaries of the nations. And there are attempts to control it, but it's a little bit loose. And I thought, oh, could this apply to outer space? And suddenly, you know, there was all kinds of ideas going on. There was no intention there. There was no focused research there. But suddenly, it just happened to be what I was reading at the time. And I think a lot of people could speak to that too. Whenever you're writing a certain book, all the reading that you're doing at that time kind of has an automatic connection to what you're working on. And this can really be stimulating. So don't stop reading when you're writing your novel, you know, just keep on reading. And you'll just be picking things out of the air to throw in there. So yeah, that can be very suggestive. It's the harder part is stopping the ideas instead of finding them, okay?
Yes, I can always tell what I was reading when I go back and look at the books that I was working on. I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Now, Timmons, I'm going to ask you basically that same question, but could you apply it to fantasy for us, please?
Well, sure. My go-to is who will be aggravated by the thing. And seriously, a reader will believe anything that pisses a character off, because nothing is more, you know, engaging and credible, then somebody's really ticked off about this. So you don't have to talk about the history of dragons. You just need to have the person who has to clean up the mess. And then you will believe the dragon and you won't need an explanation, because here's a mountain of crap that somebody has to get out of the way, or a building they have to rebuild because the dang thing set it on fire. And, you know, it's going through the realism route that makes fantasy convincing. And I tend to see weak manuscripts when the student, I'm always dealing with student manuscripts, when the student is focusing on the fantasy aspect, it all feels a little thin. But if you focus on the treating it as reality, it becomes much more convincing. And then the reader is there. It's oh, there really is magic here. Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does. Let's see. We do not have any. Oh, Ed Down just said dragon mucking is a real job. I was going to switch gears for a minute here because we only have about 20 minutes left, and I wanted to get to Lee's article because I think this is pertinent to absolutely every single person here, because she talks about time management. And I think now more than ever, we actually had a little discussion before this, before everybody came into the room, about how if you were able to stay productive during the pandemic, that it has been extremely beneficial for you. And Lee, if you wanted to talk a little bit about, I'm going to ask all of you a little bit about like your writing habits and your schedules and like that type of thing. But Lee, why don't you go ahead, because you are like the expert on the time management, because you're still, when I reread this article, I was like, oh my God, this is Lee. This is still Lee, all of this stuff. So.
Yeah, I'm sort of a time management junkie, and I always have been, but I looked back over my article and I saw that I was talking about how you need to be able to write a book a year. Well, nowadays it's like really accelerated from that, I think, due to indie publishing and just publishing schedules generally. For example, when I got my contract with HQN, suddenly I was being asked to write, oh, let's do the first 3 books in 1 year. And it was a new editor, a new team, of course I said, sure, I can do that. But I mean, then I had to really do the time management, which was just like writing every single day, being very regular about it, finding all the strategies like writing early in the morning, finding a group, now a Zoom group that you can write with, just anything to keep you going, doing sprints, writing bad first drafts, knowing that you can fix them later. I mean, there are just so many things, but this is just, I think, one of the most important things a popular fiction writer can do, because the more you write, the better you become. And the more you write, in a lot of ways, the more successful you're going to be. So anything you can do to make yourself more productive, go for it.
And have you done anything new that you would have added to your list that you do now, or differently?
I get up really early in the morning, and I also love my Zoom writing groups that, you know, just when you look around and see that screen full of people and everybody is working hard, you just can't slack off the way you can if you're in a room by yourself. So I really love that aspect of the pandemic and of the way we're living these days.
Yeah, me too. I always say, whenever Nicole Peeler, who's our current director at Seton Hill, when she started those, it was like a lifesaver for me, because yeah, I do them all the time. And now we have them going almost twice a day, every single day of the week at Seton Hill. So that's pretty awesome. Well, let's see, Mike Arnson, what do you do? Like, what is your writing routine, or do you have a schedule, or what do you do for your system?
Sure. Like Lee, I try to get things done early in the morning before the rest of the world has kind of gotten into my head and messed with it. giving me obligations or whatever. It's not always working on my own projects or book length work. Sometimes it's, I got to catch up with these posts on social media or whatever. And, you know, I'll admit, you know, during the pandemic, I have slowed down quite a bit. You would imagine, I think everybody does. I have more time, I'm at home, but there were so many things that had to adjust and accommodate the shift in the kind of world paradigm. I mean, I had to move all my classes online, and I teach online a lot. I'm good at it, I think, but to have to make a lot of radical changes really quickly, it's really off my game a little bit. And I noticed something. A lot of people that don't write full-time or as often as professionals actually are spending time writing because suddenly they have time for a hobby. Whereas for us, I think, and this happened to me a little bit too, suddenly we have more time for a different hobby. So like you might take up cooking or knitting or something like that, as opposed to spending your time writing. So you gotta watch out for that kind of stuff where there's a big gap of time, something will fill it up, and you have to be conscientious about putting your butt in the chair, putting words on one right after the other, and to stay focused. One other thing about this I wanted to say though about my writing habits. That is, I'm always writing down ideas, always. You just have to catch these things. There's Timon's booklet. That's like a butterfly net to me. It's like ideas are butterflies scattering around. If you don't catch it, if you don't have like a book ready to write it in, you're going to lose those ideas or forget them. So I'm constantly like just putting things on my phone, writing them on my computer, writing on a sketch pad, whatever it might be. And, you know, that's the gold. That's making the gold for me is getting those ideas out. When you work in genre fiction, a lot of the ideas that you first think of are things that have already been published, you know, and in short fiction especially, I think, because there's just so many stories. So you have to kind of get those out of your system and then add to it, ask questions, take it a level deeper, whatever it might be. And that takes time. It also takes time to read a lot to know what's been done. So you have to kind of manage your time in terms of not just writing, but doing the career. Like doing it like it's a career on many levels, and then measuring what's important at which point, you know, what part of the day. I better shut up, I'm talking too much, speaking of time management, but it's very complicated, I guess, is my answer.
Oh, it is. And the fact that all of the panelists are educators, it is balancing that and then also balancing your own writing and, like you said, the promotion and so on and so forth. What have you been doing? Has it changed since the pandemic?
Well, something similar to Mike. Yeah, you're finding that it's not just automatically more time to write, it's more time doing other things and having other things visited upon you and stuff like that. But actually, when I'm into the writing, I have a harder time stopping myself than encouraging myself. If it's going well, I'll write after I get up in the morning for 2 hours, stop to eat. I'll write 2 more hours after that. I'll write 2 hours in the afternoon, 2 hours in the evening. Now that doesn't go on forever, no, but for those spurts, I've learned to take advantage of that so well. And if it's going well, yeah, I have a harder time keeping myself back. Talk about trying to teach at the same time. If I have to be careful, because if I really get involved with the writing, then I won't do the grading. I won't do the reading that I should be doing. And, you know, just, no, that's unimportant. I don't want to do that. You know, I'm creating here. So, yeah, it's a balancing act. But it's not just a balancing act in terms of, oh, I've got to find time to write, or I've got to force myself to write. There's some other things you got to force yourself to do too, in order to really balance it out well. When it works very well. When it doesn't, it doesn't. Just like the write-ins, I have a very hard time tying up with the times of the write-in. It's like, well, you know, this particular hour, I'm just not in the mood, but half hour later, oh, bang, and you know, then you're churning it out. That makes it all very subjective, and when it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but when it does, it works very well. So I don't think that helps any, but that's the way it goes.
No, I think a lot of people are finding in general, it's everyone kind of has their own process. Tim Wagner, I know that you are constantly under contract for like multiple things. So how do you juggle that?
Panic works really well as you get close to a deadline. I've got 3 books due by October at this point, and I'm halfway through one of them, but still, you know, I found myself partially as I'm getting older, but also I have 2 little dachshunds, and one is old too, so she wakes me up in the morning. But I get up in the morning a lot earlier than I used to. I used to be a night owl when I was in my 20s, and now I'm like, I can't imagine it. You know, I may get up at 5 in the morning or 6 in the morning and write before my classes. I know when my classes are, so I know that I can write in between them. Most of the time, I don't have to be in the mood to write, as long as I can get into a pattern. Once I'm into a pattern, I can stay in it forever, but getting into it's not always easy. That's why it's hard for me to diet. If I gotta stop eating something, stopping it's hard. Once I don't eat it anymore, I don't care. But if I pick it back up, then I'm like addicted to it again or whatever. I tend to like do an awful lot of visualization of everything in a story. So when I'm going about my day, when I'm not at the keyboard, I'm still working on stuff, and that helps. I read an article once about, it was like sports psychology, and the idea was that, you know, and I think they say this for like martial arts too. I mean, you've like hit the ball 100 times before you actually swing at it, you know, in your mind you have. And that helps me a lot. I tend not to, well, I can't say I tend not to judge myself because I kind of edit as I go too. I kind of write sort of like this as I go through, you know, create a document. And so I don't have a lot of editing to do at the end, which helps a lot. Teaching for 30 years helps a lot too, because I don't have to learn how to be a teacher. I mean, the first 10 years, there was a lot of that where I wasn't sure what I was doing. And, you know, I had to figure that part out as well as figure the writing out. And while there's new things to figure out, not quite the same way. So I guess that helps. I don't know. That's all I can tell you.
No, that was great. And Timmons, you have a very interesting thing happening right now. Well, you actually do it every year, but now we're all very aware of it, of how many rejections you're trying to get. So could you please show us how many and explain them?
All right. So my goal for rejections for the year is 150, and I'm at 80. And this was, you know, a psychology trick that I came up with long ago. You can't control how many sales you make. That's somebody else's job. And you can control how many things you submit. And one of the, you know, it's an indirect measure, but one of the ways that you can measure that is how many times you get rejected. And instead of keeping track of the submissions only, I decided, no, I'll keep track of rejections. Because if I get a sale, then I have to write something new to make so that it can gather more rejections, you know. So for me, a sale is a setback. And, you know, and it has worked for me, you know, because I'm an advocate of brute force marketing. The deal is you need to find the editor who is inebriated or semi-psychotic today and will take your piece that no one else would touch. But if you have it on his desk or her desk the day that they're coming unglued, you can get the sale. So you have to get it out there, you know, just put it out there. So anyway, that's my discipline.
I love it. And remember, if you have any questions, I haven't seen any in the chat, so I've just been kind of going on, but put them in there if you do. Oh, Ashley, did you have some that came off of Facebook?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I have a great question that's actually directed to everyone on the panel this evening. They ask if anyone is working on any new books and how the pandemic has affected that productivity.
Oh, I'm going to take this one if nobody minds. And actually, this is me and Jay. And the rest of you can also talk about your stuff. But Jason and I started collaborating on work, especially during the pandemic. And it has been a lot of fun because we were working on a middle grade series, and then we're also working on an adult series. And it's been fun from my perspective. Jay, I don't know what you think about it. But we have been doing like the hikes, and we've been doing voice notes, and then coming back and working in Google Docs and so forth. And Jay, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, it's been nice. I mean, not many people have a writing partner that lives with them. So, you know, it's kind of funny because sometimes it was like goofing off that led to these things. Like at one point we were walking and we were thinking about those old timey Southern names. And I think my writer name was Heck Beauregard, and your writing name was Honey Jupiter. And we came up with this series, and it was Magnum PI, except it was set in the Outer Banks, and the main protagonist's name was Summer. So all of the titles were a cheeky twist on like Summer's End, or, you know. So it was kind of that goofing around and coming up with these things. I think that, you know, even our writing process is to really hammer out that first draft verbally, so that when we sit down, it just kind of comes out. And I don't know, it's been fun. And I think, you know, if nothing else, that's the big thing, is that it's fun. But yeah, I mean, you know, we're able to be honest with each other, and able to hear, you know, that, okay, well, that is not as funny as you think. I think I hear that all the time. But yeah, so it's, you know, and that's an opportunity that I wouldn't have had if not for this pandemic. So that's been really, really nice.
And the only other thing that I'll say, and I'll let everybody else talk, is that I had someone very close to me diagnosed with stage 4 leukemia during the pandemic, which prompted me to end up wanting to put together this anthology that benefits the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. It's called like Sunshine After Rain, and they're doing pre-orders through RDSP right now. It has 85 contributors, and a lot of them are actually right here in this Zoom room. And we're gonna have the big launch in July. It's gonna be July 24th through 25th. So that's the rest of mine. The rest of you, tell us what you're working on.
Well, I'm working on like 4 short stories. The pandemic has made me very productive, partly because I ended up covering for Nicole on hosting the write-ins. And what am I working on at the moment? Oh, the one where all the grape jelly packets that have gone into the landfills rise up and come back.
Al, what are you working on?
I'm working on the 4th book in my so-called Michael Wrangland series. After 2 novels and a collection of poetry, and the poetry supposedly by the protagonist of the 2 other books. So this is the 4th novel. I don't think it's been influenced by the pandemic so much. It might have been influenced by the politics of last year a little bit, which was a little bit hard not to get into the story. Maybe just I think my biggest frustration about writing the book was that I couldn't get out of the house in order to do it. Okay. Whenever I was doing the first draft, the write-ins did help there to keep you going. But as for the editing, the second and third drafts, I really wanted to change a scenery, just you know, just so that the ambiance would be a little bit different. It didn't hold me back, but yeah, there were just times I wanted to say, oh, could I be writing at, you know, Panera's or someplace, or in my office or whatever, just to get different stimulation all over, so to speak. But otherwise, I'm writing probably a little bit more in terms of putting more time into the writing that I normally would be true. But to be honest, it's not a tremendous amount more. So it's just writing is writing. Okay.
How about you, Lee?
I was sitting here typing a little time management answer into the chat. But I'm working on actually book 6 in my series, The Off Season, that's set on the Chesapeake Bay, a romance series. And book 4 is coming out in like a week, April 27th. So it's called Home to the Harbor. So that's coming out, and then there's another one, and then this one I'm working on will come out next year. So keeping busy.
Awesome. How about you, Mike?
I'm so jealous of people who have like series novels. Everything I do is standalone and often short. Well, let's see. Right now, I'm finishing up an article I have to turn in on a horror writer named Ramsey Campbell, who might be familiar to some of you. It's for an ongoing series of dark short fiction primers. I'll put a link to it in the chat. And I'm also getting ready to launch my reboot of the Gore Letter, which is a Bram Stoker award-winning newsletter. That should go out probably tomorrow or the next day. So if anybody wants to subscribe, now's the time. And I'm also making some progress on 2 book-length things that I don't want to talk about, but I'm happy to say are in motion. So yeah, and I did have one other thing I wanted to share with people. I'll have to put it in the chat, so if you're watching on Facebook, maybe you don't see it, I don't know, but it's actually an audio recording of one of the chapters I wrote for Many Genres, One Craft, called Persist. And it's kind of a pep talk for writers who are thinking about, oh, I'm going too slow, or I'm giving up, I want to give up, or something like that. So I thought I'd share that because it might be a good pep talk for somebody out there who's kind of down in the dumps because of the pandemic. So if you can't see it in the chat, it's an audio file you can get on SoundCloud. Just look for Harnson Persist and you might find it. And of course, you can find it in the book, even 10 years later after publication, Many Genres, One Craft, Lessons in Writing Popular Fiction. I just promoted it using Heidi Ruby Miller's chapter on self-promotion. So there you go.
Awesome. And Tim Wagner, we have like a little bit of time. What are you doing right now?
Trying to mute my damn screen is what I'm trying to do. I'm working on the sequel to Writing in the Dark. It's a workbook for horror writing exercises. And I'm writing so many exercises, so many every day. It's hard to come up with a lot of new exercises. After that, I got to work on another horror novel for Flame Tree Press, and then I got to do a tie-in novel for a science fiction zombie game. And that's all the stuff I got to do for October. A few short stories that I promised that I hope I can get to.
For October. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, I don't know if there are any more questions. And Lee got the question from Jeannie about time management in the chat.
Yes, that is all that we had from Facebook. So you guys did perfect with your time management. Look at that.
Awesome. Great, great. Well, thank you so much for having us. And thanks everyone for coming out.
Yes, thank you all very much. This was a great Zoom into Books presentation, and you are all just so talented, and it's wonderful to have all of you part of the Headline Books family. So we thank you very much for that. And for the record, I was one of those people who was very scared of Paranormal Activity when I saw it in the theater, Tim. So yes, it does scare certain people. So good job picking up on that.
And Ashley, you have some things that are happening too. Go ahead and share them. We would love for you to share them.
Oh, sure. Yes. I'm a picture book author illustrator, and I have 3 books coming out this year. It's my debut year, which is very exciting. So I've been, this has been very informative to kind of hear from all of you who are seasoned in this. It's good to learn from you all. So I've really enjoyed it this evening.
Good, good.
All right. Well, thank you guys so very much again. And we wish you the best of luck with your upcoming projects. And we hope that you will all be back on Zoom into Books to share them with us once they all come out. And we hope that you have a good rest of your week and can continue to forge on during this pandemic and continue to be creative. So thank you all so much.